Hello, my lovely lovelies, and welcome to Alive with Aaliyah. I thought I'd chat a bit today about INFJs and chronic illness, even though I don't necessarily know everything about this. In fact, I couldn't find that many resources on it, which was a surprise to me. Now, if you don't know what an INFJ is, that's referring to personality types, temperament disorders like Myers-Briggs, Keirsey, that sort of thing. And this is my cat. Where are you going, baby? Are you done? She's done. And INFJ is one of 16 types. And it essentially stands for introverted, intuitive, feeling, judging. But I really recommend that you look into this if you're not familiar, as it's really more about the functions. And let me just sort of do a little summary of the functions. At the top of the function stack for the INFJ is introverted intuition. And I wish I could explain introverted intuition, especially since I believe myself to have it. But basically, I would say that it's sort of like having a series of symbols and concept maps in one's subconscious mind that the mind constantly uses to generate insights and ideas. So if that makes any sense. The next is extroverted feeling, and that's kind of how it sounds. It's about feelings out there in other people and being interested in how other people feel, to the point of even having a lot of empathy, feeling what other people are feeling, that sort of thing. Next is introverted thinking, which in some ways is similar to introverted intuition, but this is going to be different in that it's more like logic and having logic maps inside of your mind and using that to generate insights that are more logical, I suppose. And then getting down there lower is extroverted sensing, and that is going to be observing the outside world. It's going to be a way to bring in information and so on. And then for the INFJ, there are other traits, functions that are not at the top of the stack like these four, and these are weaker areas for the INFJ, and so I'll go through those. Extroverted intuition, and that's extroverted intuition is that you see lots of different possibilities in the world, and you sort of are able to imagine different ways of things going, and you could even like come up with multiple suggestions. And but like as intuition, oh my goodness, am I this bad at this? Next is introverted feeling, which is dealing with your own feelings, and even a lot of times morality comes into play here, having a strong moral code and a sense of like who you are. Next comes extroverted thinking, and that's like, other people's ideas of facts, referring to, official type of information, studies, that sort of thing. And then the very bottom is introverted sensing, which is, some people say it's like a sense of history and looking back on the past, but a lot of it has to do with just like knowing what's going on inside of your own body and your own physical feelings. So now you see why I went through all of that, was to get to the point that apparently INFJ's biggest weakness is to be aware of what they're physically feeling. So obviously that presents some challenges, and it's related to why I've heard that INFJs are more prone to illness. But I've never really gotten a deep dive on that anywhere. I don't know that it's true. And so that's sort of what I wanted to make this video about, because, like I said, I am an INFJ, probably, maybe, and I do live with chronic illness. And so I thought this would be an interesting exploration. I thought it would be helpful for me, but more importantly, maybe, I'm going to assume that there are other INFJs out there who live with chronic illness. I'm not saying there's a ton of us, but I'm sure that they exist. So some of the things that I'd like to achieve would be to touch upon the difference between the unhealthy INFJ we hear so much about on social media and YouTube, and separate that out from the chronically ill INFJ as different concepts. Another thing I would like to do is to look at some of the correlations between living with chronic illness and living as an INFJ, and seeing what matches up. I would like to explore some of the strengths and weaknesses of INFJs, and then how those relate to chronic illness. And the goal there would be to come up with some strategies, some coping strategies specific to INFJs, to utilize the strengths when coping, and to maybe mitigate some of those weaknesses. Will I achieve all those things? I don't know. I haven't really planned all the answers, and I'm just gonna wing it. Okay. So what is the difference between a chronically ill INFJ and an unhealthy INFJ? So the big thing I want to distinguish here is talking about mental health versus physical health. And I think that when people refer to the unhealthy INFJ, they're referring to someone who's has a lot of psychological growth yet to do. And I don't know where to put mental illness in this, because that's challenging, because in Myers-Briggs and personality sorting, all that sort of thing, they sometimes say that if someone has a mental illness, it may be hard to type them or for them to find their type. And in the chronic illness community, we oftentimes do embrace people with mental illness as part of our community, because we face so many similar challenges. And then there's the really obvious thing is that there can be overlap between chronic physical illness and mental illness. Those things can go together, they can exacerbate each other. One of the things we're very sensitive to in the chronic illness community is being told that our real physical illnesses are simply psychological manifestations or mental illness, and that's something that is a real struggle in the community. And I think that when I hear that INFJs, because of their personality, because of having poor introverted sensing, that they're prone to these things, that rubs me the wrong way, because I'm putting up this wall because I'm hearing that it's to do with my mental state that I'm sick. So I don't like that. Just because I don't like it, that doesn't mean that it's true or not true, but it's a bias I noticed that I knew I had to make note of. But when we talk about, the unhealthy INFJ, it usually just means that they haven't developed down into their stack, and that they're really relying on their top functions like introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, and they're not getting down and developing that that thinking, the internal thinking. What is it? Introverted thinking. Hello. Yes, I'm back, everyone. Okay, introverted thinking, and especially not into the next one down, extroverted sensing. And so that's really not at all related to mental health or chronic illness. So I just thought it was really important to clarify that we're talking about different things here, because if you go and do a search for health issues in INFJ, you'll probably find a lot about unhealthy INFJs and a little bit about mental illness, specifically anxiety and depression for INFJs. So we're talking about something else. We're talking about chronic illness, and some examples of chronic illness, in case you're not familiar, would be, the long list of autoimmune diseases. I just, the things I start thinking of are chronic fatigue syndrome, POTS, lupus, MS, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, and then you have some other stuff. All right, so now that we know what we're talking about when it comes to chronic illness, let's talk about some of the correlations between being an INFJ and living with chronic illness. Okay, so number one, I'm going to say being misunderstood. INFJs are known for being misunderstood, that they are able to understand the people around them using extroverted feeling, and that with that intuition, they're often able to glean very precise insights into others. But due to having poor introverted feeling, they have a challenge when it comes to actually expressing themselves to others. And because they spend so much time in this introverted intuition state of mind that's so heavily subconscious, that's not necessarily language based, that's more symbolic, that can be very hard to communicate and convey to others. So living with chronic illness is you get misunderstood all the time, because people just have a very difficult time imagining what it's like to live with certain challenges. And the cat is back. So people with chronic illness tend to be misunderstood, and a lot of that just has to do with it being difficult for others to imagine what it's like living with those kinds of physical challenges. A lot of it has to do with people with chronic illness presenting, looking very normal, and not fitting into stereotypes necessarily of what people think of as being sick and or disabled. And so, if you're an INFJ living with chronic illness, you probably get misunderstood a lot. So I kind of tied that in with self-expression, and I want to do a little more deep dive on the correlation with communicating to others about yourself. So I kind of said that for INFJ, it's hard to explain yourself to others, and for being misunderstood as chronically ill, I think we do have a hard time explaining to doctors and people around us about our symptoms and our challenges, maybe because they're difficult to understand. But I don't know, I actually do know some people who are really good at it. I'm not one of them. And sometimes diagnoses are based on symptom sets more so than lab results, so that can be particularly challenging. I know that I've been undiagnosed and underdiagnosed and misdiagnosed and all sorts of stuff, and that at times, I really relied on lab work to show what was going on with me and imaging. So let's return back to the function stack and think about the strengths and weaknesses of the INFJ, and then look at those in terms of chronic illness. So starting with introverted intuition, where we're strongest, I think some of our strengths there, especially with coping, are to have a really rich inner life that I think that we can handle a certain amount of time without stimulus, because we have such busy minds. And I think another way that that's a strength is that we can sometimes figure out our health when we have enough information, because we can put it together like a puzzle. So we might be able to generate suggestions or ideas to present to our doctors. I think that we can be exceptional at adaptation because we are not so attached to a certain way of doing things that we can look at our existing abilities and a goal that we would like to achieve, and then with an introverted intuition, without even putting energy into it, just pop out with an idea of like, okay, I'm going to do things this way and this is going to work for me. So we can be very, very inventive, very ingenuitive. So honestly, those all seem like strengths to me. I don't see any weaknesses there. Yay. When it comes to extroverted feeling, this is going to be a mixed bag. We want to help people. We want to help people. That's all we really want, right? I would rather help people, help others, than help myself. But the old adage, I guess it's not that old, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first. So we've got to take care of ourselves. So that can be a weakness, that we're more interested in helping others than ourselves, because we're often in a place where we need to be helping ourselves. And one of the things that I did was I tried to turn that around on itself. I have all these skills and techniques for seeing what's going on with someone else and offering them care, and I may not be able to see what I need as easily, but I kind of took on a form of self-talk. So it's not about having that ability to understand my own needs. It's more about just giving myself positive affirmations on a regular basis to encourage myself, and take all that love that I want to give to others and turn that mirror towards myself. You'll hear about mirroring, especially in terms of extroverted feeling for INFJs, that we mirror the people around us, and we show them what they need to see about themselves. We guide them, and we can also use that mirror as a mask to help us blend in and to be more of a chameleon in different settings. So the trick here is to try to turn the mirror towards yourself. And this doesn't mean you suddenly have like all this great understanding of introverted feeling. You just send out what you would send to others back to yourself in the form of love, care, and affirmations. It doesn't necessarily have that same power of understanding, but the love is there. And the way to create the motivation behind that, when you care so much about helping others, is to just, part of those affirmations is helping myself, is helping make me stronger so that I can help others. So another problem with chronic illness and extroverted feeling is that we tend to be somewhat isolated living with chronic illness. We don't have as much access to other people. We often find ourselves online, trying to find community that way. And oftentimes the people that we're seeing on a regular basis are, only going to be, family members, close friends, close romantic partners, and care team medical staff. And this is obviously going to depend on the amount of, mobility and energy that each individual has. Some people may have the energy for a more active social life, but this is often one of the first things to go, and something that many of us spend a lot of time grieving over and adapting to. And with INFJs especially, so much of our purpose is, it's not about socializing with people to have small talk or be entertained. It's that we genuinely want to help others. It's just this drive. So trying to figure out how to fulfill that is very challenging. So some of the things I've done over time to work towards that, it has been to do volunteer work online, to offer peer support, in an internet setting. Another thing that I've done is to join like a local group and do volunteering. Trying to find ways to give back and help that's within my limits, within my energy. And I have a background in web design, so sometimes it's just that kind of volunteer work. Even though that doesn't give me that same sense of connection, I still feel like I'm helping, so that's very beneficial. But again, it's important to be in that place where I'm caring about myself and nurturing myself before I start to take on these volunteer commitments. And it's definitely a challenge to volunteer, because what if you get a really bad bout of sickness, a flare-up, and you're unable to fulfill whatever you committed to? So we want to please people, we want to give them a good experience, so that's definitely a fear, and some of that just takes time and experience to know what you can and cannot commit to. And what's especially important when you have chronic illness is boundaries. Boundaries. You have to set boundaries at the beginning. And it's hard because you don't know where your boundaries are. They change every single day. But setting those boundaries early on and then touching on them to remind others of where those boundaries are puts you in a much better position to be able to be helpful, to put yourself out there, to help others, without getting yourself into that situation where you have overextended yourself, you're not able to help anymore, and then you leave people feeling abandoned. So boundaries, I can't even begin to explain how valuable they are. I feel like I could go on about FE forever. Because this is how we interact with the world, right? Like, introverted intuition is very it's almost like my safe space, but I have to feed it. And that's where FE, extroverted feeling, comes in. And the more time you spend alone, the more hungry you get to understand people, to learn about people, and to help people. So you have to find ways to fulfill that. You have to. All right, moving down to introverted thinking. Introverted thinking and chronic illness. I felt like I was really developing introverted thinking. In my career, I did well with charts. I liked to look at like user flow charts online for websites, for social media, to try to understand human behavior through these charts that like I could then like imagine and extrapolate in my mind. But in terms of chronic illness, this is kind of an area, raw logic, where we try to figure out our own health issues. And we're not necessarily very good at the extroverted thinking and doing the research and understanding all these different medical studies. We should still try, okay? Please try. But, you know, I read that stuff and it doesn't really necessarily click so well with me. But I try to use introverted thinking in my own daily life as I try to figure out what works and does not work for me and to come up with new ideas. And so I think that, you know, like for medication management, to keep, you know, my pills organized, I come up with ideas for that sort of thing. Or, you know, what's going on with my nutrition? How do I get the right food and that sort of thing. But it feels weaker. Like I said, I felt like I was really starting to develop it at work, and I'm not really sure how to better leverage that for chronic illness. I admit that, and I feel like this gaping hole where extroverted thinking is. Like, I wish I could just read all those studies and understand it all and come up with what I should be doing based upon that, but I'm a little more prone to other methods. Admittedly, I rely on my doctors a lot and just defer to my doctors because I know that they think that way. But I do appreciate the scientific method, and I feel better knowing if things have been tested. It's definitely better than getting stuck in some pyramid scheme, taking snake oil and placebos. Okay, moving on to extroverted sensing. I do feel like extroverted sensing is such a great tool because sometimes, like I said, we don't have as much access to extroverted feeling as we'd like to be able to connect with people. And I can feel a really similar connection to animals and to nature. And so I feel like extroverted sensing can really be leveraged in nature. So this is why I'm really into gardening. This is why I'm into backyard birding. I feel very meditative, and I can take in a lot of this information that way, visually, listening with my five senses. And what I like to do about that, it almost feels like FE sometimes because I love my birds. I raise the butterflies and I care so much about them and their well-being. So, you know, I watch, I observe, I try to figure out what their patterns are, you know, what their behaviors are, what, you know, and same for my plants, what makes them happy, what can I do to make them happy, make them healthy, have them have a better experience. And one of the things that I found out about that was surprising to me was caring so much about my garden, the wildlife, appealed to other people. And they would see what I was doing and want to talk to me about it. And so I would have better access to extroverted feeling there. And that was really fulfilling for me. And one of the things I really hoped to do was to show people that if you do certain things in your yard or in other urban or suburban areas, that you can reintroduce wildlife, you can create habitat, and give them a place to thrive. And that's something I feel really strongly about. And that's something, just having the wildlife here around my home just fills my heart with joy. And it's something that is very meditative for me, very zen. And it's something I feel like I've really developed more in my later years here. I'm turning 40 soon. So only in the last few years do I feel like I've really gotten more connected to this. And it's been wonderful. Just the deep sense of peace I feel from connecting all of those things. It's really wonderful. And so in some ways it's been maybe my best, developing the extroverted sensing may be one of my best coping skills thus far. So I think it's true for any INFJ that working on developing all of your functions is really going to be beneficial to your well-being. And I think some of the ways that an INFJ can cope with chronic illness are, like I said, for extroverted feeling, to turn that mirror towards yourself and try to send that love towards yourself and that caring, and use the motivation that's going to help you to help others. I think the combination between extroverted sensing and introverted intuition can create a real sense of peace, a real sense of wholeness, to take in all the beauty, to observe as much as you can, and to fill your mind with that. And that to fill your mind with that in a way that allows you to be a creator, that allows you to be part of that cycle of life, and to come up with inspiration and ideas, to nurture the living things around you. I feel like I really need to lie down. So I expected to have more insights than I did. I'm a little disappointed in myself. Maybe it's because it's later in the day. I'm actually still questioning if I'm an INFJ. I was just thinking about how much joy I was finding in extroverted sensing. Who knows? Feel free to leave a comment about if you live with chronic illness, or if you're an INFJ, or, as most of these comments turn out, how I've terribly mistyped myself and what I actually am. You know. But yeah, leave a comment, let me know what you think. I usually don't talk about these things too much because I find it really hard to sort of sit and do a stream of consciousness. It's a little too vulnerable, I feel. I don't feel very comfortable putting myself out there. And I also don't feel like I'm knowledgeable enough about typology. And I mean, I've been interested in it for decades, but that doesn't mean I know it so well. And I know there are a lot of people in my life that don't take it very seriously. And I don't know if I try to look at it as any tool. You know, you don't have to take it so seriously, but if it can help you, or if it can help you to help others, then why not use that tool? Well, thank you so much for joining me on A Live with Aaliyah. Please click like, please subscribe. Let me know if you'd like me to talk more about typology or INFJ stuff. And yeah, live in love with life.